gentlemen, welcome to On the Trail with Miles James Dean. Today marks the first episode in a series of episodes detailing every aspect of my horseback ride and journey from the African American burial grounds near Wall Street in New York City to the African American Museum in Los Angeles, California. I believe the series will be informative, insightful, truthful, and as entertaining as sometimes it truly was. You'll get to know about me and who and what motivated me to undertake such an arduous adventure. And I do think that my mother dressing me in a cowboy shirt and tie at the age of 5 may have had something to do with it. I'll introduce you to all the drivers who accompanied me and the interactions and entanglements we sometimes shared, the personalities and capabilities of the several horses that were with me in the beginning and were either kept or traded for another while on the journey, including the horse from hell. You'll also meet the African American scholars and caretakers of Black and Indigenous history who graciously embraced the journey and who spoke with authority about the theme in their respective state. And moreover, there were the people, the ordinary citizen. I encountered them on each block and city street I rode, who would either offer a contribution, perhaps their home for the night, or their corral or stable for the horses, or just a friendly wave. You know, I tell people all the time that I practically rode through West Virginia with one hand on the reins and the other in the air because people just wouldn't stop waving. All of the stories begin today, and thereafter each episode will air on Sunday. And I've chosen to launch this new mini-series today because this is the Sunday just before the 17th anniversary of the end of my 6-month, 1-weekend, over 5,000-mile horseback ride that ended on April the 1st, 2008. As mentioned previously, my story was told by Miss Lisa Winkler in her book entitled On the Trail, a Black Cowboy's Ride Across America. And again, I urge you to read it, and it will make a wonderful addition to your library collection. As I've also, or often rather, said, many people question me about the intimacies on the journey that were not revealed in the book, and so I've decided to tell it all. More importantly, I'm hoping that my story, although 17 years old, can still inspire or motivate someone to envision or to dream and then turn that vision or dream into their reality through perseverance and dedication to the vision. And if nothing more, then at least enjoy my tales from the trail. I'd like to begin with the acknowledgement that my motivation to leave my sheltered lifestyle and venture out to explore and to test the waters of the unknown came primarily from women. My mother, who demonstrated what hard work and a positive attitude and a belief in oneself could accomplish, to Wendy, who once said, "Miles, if a cowboy is what you want to be, then what are you waiting for? Just do it." To Fairley, who introduced me to the cultural arts of other countries, to Jose, who awakened within me the sleeping giant of adventurism, to Cheyenne, who, without her assistance, the journey across the United States would not have been possible, and to Liz, who resurrected me from the shadow of my past, reinstalling my lifelong passion and connection to the horse. To all of you, I dedicate these upcoming series. So, as we stroll together down memory lane, I will share stories about the people, places, and things that surrounded and engulfed this expedition across the country. This will include people who were with me on the journey, some of the places which may have been places that you would think twice before deciding to go there, And some of the things, to say the least, were risky, while others went according to plan A, B, or C, depending. I'm going to keep it as positive as I can, and most of the time it was, and avoid any disparaging comments about any behaviors or attitudes, or do any finger and thumb pointing, unless there were incidents that make it absolutely necessary to comment on. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say that by managing, with that demanaging, 5 drivers, 2 cameramen, 5 horses, 5 different web developers conducting interviews, the researching and writing of commentaries while on the trail, the sometimes daily planning of alternate routes, all of that and whatever else I can't recall, while sitting in the saddle for anywhere from 6 to as many as 10 hours in a day, covering anywhere from 12 and up to 48 miles a day, was by no stretch of the imagination easy peasy. And by the time you and I together reach Texas, well before we get into Arizona, New Mexico, and the Chocolate Mountains of California, you'll have a thorough understanding of why I say it wasn't a walk in the park. What I would like to do first is tell you a little about myself and offer an abbreviated version of what it is inside of me that drove me and still to this day drives me to take risks that seemingly seek to reach the limits of unlimited boundaries, and the desire to continuously stimulate and nurture my physical, mental, cultural, and emotional well-being, and then ultimately jump on a horse and ride from New York to California. So, to put this inner drive into context, allow me to take you back to April of 1968, the day Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and most vividly the riots in the city in which I lived. It was my senior year at Weequahic High School. The high school was in the city of Newark, New Jersey. When my high school dismissed early amidst reports of mobs of students crossing the city in the intent to beat up white students, I couldn't understand, because the demographics in the high school were evenly split between black and white students. To my knowledge, had no history of racial tension. While walking home, I saw a white classmate clearly terrified, knowing that he was walking toward an approaching mob. I don't know why I did it. I didn't think about it. I just felt his fear and wanted to comfort him by putting my arm around his shoulder and walking with him. Within seconds, I heard someone in the mob shout, "There's one, get him." And another voice called back, "Nah, leave them alone." I truly think it was that moment that gave me a new perspective of myself that shaped my future as a peace-loving activist and a role model for human decency and respect. Reflectively looking back to my first year on the campus of Howard University, wearing my cowboy boots, Wrangler jeans, and a matching jean waist jacket with rabbit skin sewed on the back, and topped off by sporting my Billy Jack hat with colored women's earrings clipped around the headband, I realized that my spirit and feelings of peace and love seemed in sharp contrast to the campus environment. Remember, Dr. Martin Luther King had been assassinated several months earlier, and the university campus had become a hub for black revolutionary ideology, fueled with the speeches by H. Rod Brown and Stokely Carmichael, and resounding throughout the campus among the student population who spoke and practiced it outwardly with pride and enthusiasm. The Afro hairstyle, the dashiki shirts, and the black handshake were symbols of being in accord with Black revolutionary thinking and resounded in the songs of artists around the country. Curtis Mayfield's People Get Ready, There's a Train A-Comin', James Brown's release of I'm Black and I'm Proud, and I can go on and on. Hello, Sister Love, and hello, Brother Man were everyday greetings within the community of love and respect for thyself and your Black brothers and sisters. And I might add that we can sure use a little more of that today. We even hung posters and prints, excuse me, on the walls in our dormitories reflecting the sentiments of the time. One example was a poster drawing depicting a man tearing his shirt and revealing a smooth chest on one side and a muscular chest on the other, while his lips and nose on one side of his face was pointed and the other side had wide nostrils and thick lips. And behind, or at the bottom of the poster, it read, "Behind every Negro, there's a potential Black man." There were other posters who read, "Free your mind and your ass will follow." These revolutionary ideas, revolutionary to me, had me questioning my wanting to be something that, to the best of my knowledge, was only reserved for white men, and that was the cowboy way of life. Obviously, at age 18, I was naive, misinformed, and had very little knowledge of Black history. Such is the mind of an impressionable young man whose only historical references lay between his home in New Jersey and his school in Washington, D.C., and the big screen, of course, but not in the public library. So, the obsession of wanting to be a peace-loving cowboy was turned totally on its head and ultimately deferred. That is until 1972, 74, when I saw the Western movie Buck and the Preacher with Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte in the starring roles. Two positive and powerful Black dramatic actors on the big screen in a Western movie portraying Black cowboys brought back my earliest fantasy, and the desire to be a Black cowboy resurfaced. By this time in my life's consciousness, everything reverberated around the color of my skin. My parents had sheltered me from the civil rights era, so my indoctrination into a Black social and political mindset was the shock and awe of my university experience. Yet, that experience became the underbelly of the horseback journey across America. Sidney Poitier's portrayal of a Black cowboy gave me the inspiration. My ever-evolving Black consciousness gave me the motivation, and my spirit of adventure gave me the will and determination. Although the inspiration to pursue my dream of becoming a cowboy came in 1974, for one reason or another, I wasn't able to pull the trigger, figuratively speaking, that is, and actually get on a horse until 10 years later. The year was 1984, and that year I was invited to travel to Turkey and explore the European and Asian sides of the country. While in Istanbul, I was invited by one of my friends to a business luncheon with a client of hers. The client owned a restaurant located at the beach of an inlet at the Sea of Marmara. After the meeting, we were invited to go for a horseback ride on the beach, and this would actually be my first horseback ride. The client was a tall, young, dark-haired Turkish man with a thick mustache which accentuated his very pleasant smile. There was nothing impressionable about his features that factored into my mind until we arrived on the beach. My companion and I walked down to the beach where the horses were stabled and waited for them to be brought out. Without much delay, the younger man and his much older assistant walked out with the two horses. The young Turk mounted the jet black stallion, leaned down, and gave instructions to the older man who held the much older, much smaller horse. I watched him take off at a gallop while I stepped into the stirrup, being held by the older man, and into the saddle, and continued watching as my companion was assisted and positioned on the back of our older horse. She had never ridden either, and held tightly around my waist, which was of no comfort to me, because that was the moment the physical appearance of the younger man became impressionable. I watched as he rode away on that black beauty of a horse, and all I could imagine was that she wished she was on the back of his horse, holding on to him, instead of on the nag we were on, and I felt ashamed and embarrassed. Hey, call it what you want. Vanity, ego, oversensitivity, whatever. But I was humiliated at being led around like a child at a pony party, and it was at that moment I made the promise to myself that I would never be embarrassed like this again, and vow to start riding when I returned stateside, and I did. Within weeks, I found a horse stable, took 10 riding lessons on a horse, purchased that same horse, and named him Cici, which means Mr. Control in Turkish. Now, in my mind, just because I could ride a horse and own a horse didn't make me authentic, and I wanted to become the textbook definition of a cowboy. But at age 35, I was too old to try rodeoing or cow punching or bulldogging, and I didn't have a horse ranch, so I did the next best thing. I purchased some black powder guns and practiced shooting balloons from the back of my newly acquired second horse named Chardonnay. Eventually, I was able to become part of the halftime performance in a few rodeos, and my mission was accomplished. I was officially and technically a cowboy. Call me anal, I don't care. For the next several years, I did a lot of trail riding, learned a lot from my horses, did intensive studies on the history of our country with a focus on the period when the horse was the major mode of transportation, and had learned a great deal about the black men and women who made a significant contribution to the exploration, settlement, and expansion of the United States. By now, I was living on a mini ranch, stabling as many as 15 horses, all belonging to me. There's something to be said about owning 15 horses, and one is that 15 is 14 too many. So why so many? Well, in 1992, with the desire to offer any inner city youths the opportunity to get involved with the sport of horseback riding, I partnered with the Plainfield City Housing Authority in the state of New Jersey to give up approximately 48 to 60 youths between the ages of 10 and 14 a 2-week horseback riding experience. The camp operated with a paid staff between the months of July and August, and operated again in 1993, and proved to be very rewarding for the children who were able to participate. There were no other horseback riding programs in the state of New Jersey who offered free servicing inner city youth horseback riding programs. Then, in 1973, at the end of the camp, I took several of the more accomplished riders who were enrolled in the camp and who were the most motivated, and formed the Phoenix Riders, a 4-H horseback riding program. For them, it was an opportunity to apply their horseback riding skills to something tangible by officially becoming a horseback riding club. The youngsters began to interact and participate with other horse riding clubs across the state of New Jersey, which broadened their cultural perspectives and social interaction skills, while reinforcing at the same time the understanding that dedication and good work ethic can be rewarding. For those of you who don't know, the history of the 4-H began in 1902 in different parts of the United States, and shortly thereafter became an initiative of the agricultural universities throughout the country, focusing on the idea of practical, hands-on, minds-on learning, which came from the desire to make public education more connected to, at that time, the rural life. Of course, what is left out in the history of the 4-H was the idea that by introducing new farming technologies to the participating youths, they would eventually take over the farms owned by their parents and would put these new technologies into practice as their parents, for whatever reasons, were reluctant to implement. Remember, these state agricultural institutions were funded by the government. So, the Phoenix Riders were the first and only 4-H horseback riding club in the state of New Jersey whose members were black and from the inner city. I want to show you or tell you a story about this guy. His name is Mac. Each day after work, I would pick them up from their homes and bring them out to the stables. There were about 8 or 9 of them, where they would clean the stalls, groom, ride, and then feed the horses. On every occasion, they would come out of their apartments wearing baggy jeans, large shirts, or hoodies, with untied sneakers, carrying a paper bag and a backpack. Once they arrived at the barn, they would go into the dressing room, change, and come out dressed in their tight-fitting blue jeans, cowboy shirts, Wrangler boots, and top it off with a smartly brimmed Western hat. And for the rest of the afternoon, it was pure giddy-up. The anecdote that I want to share about Mac, who rode an outrageously fast white pony called Loudon. Loudon was so fast. How fast? But yet, unwilling to enter the arena, that he couldn't be ridden into the arena, but had to be walked in. If you try to ride him in, it would literally take minutes. It had gotten to the point where the spectators at each show would simply sit on the grass and watch the struggle to get him in. But once he entered the arena, everyone moved to the fence because they knew the performance that this horse was about to put on would be amazing. It was well known among all the New Jersey 4-H clubs across the state that if Loudon and Tiny Taboo, ridden by Akbar, showed up, the best anyone else could achieve was 3rd place. Now, with this one event I want to share, Mac entered the arena on Loudon to compete in the Montana Keyhole event, which was to run your horse as fast as possible toward 2 parallel poles that were slightly over 33 yards away. And then before passing through the second set of poles that were about 10 feet behind the first set, you had to spin your horse around right in between these 4 poles and head back in the direction that you came, back to the starting line. Well, on this one occasion, Loudon spun around so fast inside that keyhole that Mac was flung out of the saddle. But instead of falling on the ground, he rotated his body so that he was lying across the saddle with both legs on the same side. Excuse me. Yes. The same way you see bounty hunters in Western movies coming into town with the dead men they had just killed lying across the backs of their saddles was the way Mac was riding his horse back to the finish line. But this 13-year-old boy was driving the horse forward because he still had the reins in his hands and was able to cross the finish line and bring the horse to a stop. I am not exaggerating. The crowd went wild to see this kid flying home and dangling off the back of this horse. It was remarkable, an impressionable thing to see. Now, needless to say that because his feet had not touched the ground, he was eligible to place in the competition, and as usual, took first. By the time the boys had aged out of the 4-H program, I had decided to discontinue the program and turn my interest into finding other ways to spread the knowledge of the history of the Black West and revisited the arts. Using my past theatrical experience, I wrote, produced, and performed in a play entitled The Black Western Experience. Along with a cast of 5, we began performing the presentation at elementary and high schools throughout New Jersey. There's a playbill on my YouTube channel that where you can see the actors, the names, and what the performance is about. Well, that was the era of the 90s, and soon after, I began to plan the horseback ride across the country. Eventually, I changed from becoming a horseman, or cowboy rather, to becoming a horseman. But we'll talk about that later. So in the next series, I'm going to introduce Sankofa to you and talk about the professional horse therapy and equine fitness programs that I entered with my horses so that I could ensure that they would be emotionally and physically prepared for the task. So if you've enjoyed this presentation, hit the like button and the notification button to be informed when the next podcast comes online, which should be about the same time next week. So, thank you for joining me on the episode of On the Trail with Miles James Dean. And the journey is just beginning.